Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some really interesting stuff to dig into today.
Yeah, it looked like a pretty deep rabbit hole.
It is this Educational Choice for Children Act. It's got people talking, that's for sure. So, the ECCA is basically, it's kind of like a federal voucher program for schools, but there's a twist.
Right. It uses these things called education savings accounts,
ESAs.
ESAs.
Okay.
And parents can use those for a whole bunch of different education expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Private school, tutoring, even homeschooling materials.
Now, I know you're pretty familiar with this whole school voucher debate, but for our listeners who, might be hearing about this for the first time, could you maybe just give us a quick, what are school vouchers?
Sure. So school vouchers, the basic idea is to give parents more say in their kids' education. How? By letting them use public funds to pay for private school or other education costs. Now, people who support vouchers say this creates competition, which they say, ends up with better education for everyone. But people who are against them, they worry that vouchers take away money from public schools, and that just makes the inequalities that are already there even worse.
Right, and that kind of brings us back to the ECCA and how these ESAs are funded, you said, through donations. But this isn't like your typical school bake sale, right?
No, not at all. This is different. The ECCA, it proposes a 100% federal tax credit for anyone who donates to what they're calling scholarship granting organizations.
SGOs.
Yeah, SGOs. And then these SGOs, they distribute the money to families using the ESAs. So imagine you could completely wipe out what you owe in taxes just by donating to one of these organizations. That's a huge incentive.
Wow. Yeah, especially for, wealthy people or big companies. No, that funding system, it definitely raises some questions. It's a pretty big change from how most donations usually work. And it, makes me wonder about misuse. Your sources mention some pretty concerning examples from state-level ESA programs.
Yeah, there have been cases where ESA money was spent on things that weren't really educational,
Like what?
like theme park tickets, cosmetics.
No way. Really?
Yeah, and they did catch those cases, but it just shows you how easy it might be for someone to abuse the system, especially with the ECCA, because it's proposing way less federal oversight than state-level programs have.
So we could be looking at, billions of dollars going into this program, and no one's really checking to see how it's actually being spent.
It's a concern, yeah.
Okay, so you also included some sources that were specifically about California and how the ECCA could impact the state. California, historically, hasn't been a fan of voucher programs, right?
Nope, very much against them. California is really committed to public education. It's actually written right into their state constitution.
Oh, wow.
Article 9 mandates a system of free public schools, and then Proposition 98 guarantees a certain amount of funding for those schools. So the ECCA being a federal program, it kind of goes right up against what California has worked so hard to build.
So the people who support public education in California, what are they saying about the ECCA?
They're worried. They say it could really damage the progress California has made in making sure that all students get a fair shot at a good education, regardless of their background.
Okay.
And one of your sources is actually written by a public school teacher in California, paints a really clear picture of how disruptive the ECCA could be. Yeah, they talk about how, California has these high standards for teachers and a really challenging curriculum. It's all designed to get kids ready for college or, whatever they want to do after they graduate. And they're saying that if money gets taken away from public schools, well, it's just going to make things worse. Bigger class sizes, fewer resources, and just an overall decline in the quality of education.
Yeah, I see.
They also point out that California already has a lot of charter schools,
Right.
which, they're publicly funded, but they're independent. So their point is that California already gives parents some choices without messing with how public education works.
That's an interesting point, and it kind of brings us to how the ECCA gets around these protections that California has put up. It seems like this federal program would just let these SGOs, operate anywhere they want, even if a state doesn't like vouchers.
Exactly. So even though California has always said no to vouchers, the ECCA would still let SGOs come in, set up shop, and start directing federal money to private schools.
And wouldn't that be really difficult for families if they ran into problems?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine trying to hold an out-of-state SGO accountable.
Yeah.
If something went wrong, it would be a nightmare.
Yeah, I could see that. Now, some of your sources also mentioned that existing nonprofits, like the ones that are, already working in education, could become SGOs under the ECCA.
Yeah, there's one example in particular that's really interesting. Towdester Abbey, it's a nonprofit,
Hmm.
and they work with autistic students. And the question they're asking is, would organizations like them be willing to take part in a program that, yeah, it might help them reach more students, but could also really hurt public schools? It's a tough choice, for sure. I mean, on one hand, they could help more students, provide resources to families who really need them. But on the other hand, they'd be part of a system that a lot of people think would be bad for public education in the long run.
Yeah, it's like they're kind of stuck in the middle. But this brings up something else about the ECCA, how it could affect the whole country, not just California. You've got sources from other states too. So, how would this program change things in states that already have voucher programs?
That's a really important question. See, the ECCA, it could actually make those existing programs even stronger, which is what's kind of a problem, because then donors could get tax breaks from both the state and the federal government.
Oh, I
It's
see.
it's like a double dip. And that just takes more money away from public schools.
So the better the ECCA works at moving that money around, the more appealing it becomes to people who just want to pay less in taxes.
Exactly. And that changes how we think about education. It's not a public good anymore, something that's
Yeah.
important for everyone. It becomes more like a product you buy.
Hmm. Like something you choose based on what you can afford.
Right. And your sources, if they compare this to other things that have been privatized, like healthcare infrastructure. And the question is, does that really work? Does it benefit everyone or just a select few?
It definitely makes you think. Now, one of your sources, a policy analyst who, specializes in education funding, they bring up something else that's pretty worrying. The potential for fraud. We talked about those cases where ESA money was misused, but with the ECCA and how little oversight there is, I mean, wouldn't that risk just explode?
Oh, for sure. I mean, without clear rules, without people checking to see what's going on, it's a recipe for disaster.
Hmm.
And it's not just about, stopping people from using the money for personal stuff, although that's important. It's about making sure that the services they're paying for are, actually good quality, that they actually help students.
Right. If no one's looking at the vendors, the programs families are choosing, how can we be sure they're getting what they need, especially the families who are really struggling and looking for any solution?
Exactly. And that lack of oversight, it goes for the SGOs themselves, too. The ECCA basically lets them do whatever they want without having to be transparent or accountable. So it's not just about where the money goes once it reaches families. It's about how these SGOs are making decisions, what their priorities are, and how much influence they could have.
It's kind of like a black box. You put money in, but you don't really know what's happening inside.
Right. And I think one of the hardest things about understanding this whole debate is the language. Like school choice, parental empowerment. They sound good,
Hmm.
right? But they can be really misleading.
Yeah, I mean, school choice makes it sound like everyone has the same options.
Exactly. But they don't. Things like how much money you have, where you live, even just knowing what choices are out there, that makes a huge difference.
So the ECCA could actually make things less fair by giving more choices to the people who already have more advantages.
It's a real concern. And it's not just about private schools. The ECCA could also impact, tutoring services, special ed support, after-school programs, the things that can really help kids succeed. And if those things become harder to get for families who are already struggling, the gap just gets wider.
It's it's a lot to consider. We've talked a lot about the potential problems with the ECCA, but what about the people who support it? What are their main arguments? They talk about individual freedom, parental rights. What do you think about that?
Well, it's definitely true that parents care deeply about their kids' education,
Hmm.
and they should have a say in it, absolutely. But the question is, does the ECCA really empower parents, or does it just take power away from elected school boards and give it to private organizations that don't have to answer to anyone?
So it's about finding a balance between individual choice and what's good for everyone, and making sure that all kids, no matter who they are or where they come from, have a chance to get a good education.
That's it, exactly. And that's what makes this such a complex issue. It's not just about money or rules. It's about what we believe in as a society and how important education is to us.
Now, you also included some sources that look at the ECCA as part of this bigger push for privatization and less government regulation. Could you talk about that a little more?
Sure. So the ECCA kind of fits into this trend of of taking things that used to be handled by the government and handing them over to private companies. And the thinking behind that is, well, the free market will make things more efficient, more innovative.
And with education, the idea is that if you have competition from vouchers, then public schools will have to improve or they'll lose students and funding.
Right. But people who are against that approach, they say it doesn't really work for education. Because education isn't just another product you can buy. It's something that benefits everyone in society.
Hmm. It's like, public parks or clean air or libraries. It's something we all share. I mean, we all benefit from.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And if we start treating it like just another thing to buy and sell, we might actually hurt the very things that public education is supposed to do, like make things fair and give everyone a chance to succeed.
It's definitely a complicated issue. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to think about you, the listener. You sent us these sources. You've obviously been thinking about this a lot. What are you taking away from all this information? What are your big takeaways?
Well, I think the most important thing is to realize that the ECCA, it's not just about politics. It's about what we value as a society. It asks us, how do we feel about education? Is it just another thing you can buy, or is it something that we're all responsible for, something that benefits everyone?
And even if you're not someone who's, directly affected by school vouchers right now, this debate, it matters for everyone. Public education, it's what makes our democracy work and how we decide to fund our schools, how we set them up. It's going to have an impact on everyone.
Absolutely. It's not about, just one student or one family. It's about the kind of future we want. A strong public education system, it helps the economy, it helps people be informed citizens, and it helps make society fairer. And if we weaken public education, well, all those things suffer.
Yeah. And your sources, they really make the point that the ECCA, it's not just about like the money, it's a whole different way of looking at education and what it's for.
Right. It makes us think about what's important in education. Do we want to treat it like something you can buy, like any other product, or is it something that everyone deserves, something that we all have to work together to support?
And that's a question that we all need to think about. No matter what your political views are or what your experience with schools has been, what we decide about the ECCA, it's going to have an impact for a long, long time.
Definitely. It's really important that we talk about this and that we listen to each other. You know, we need to look at the facts and think about the good and the bad that could come from all of this. We need to get past the slogans and really, really understand what's at stake.
Yeah. So as things change, as we figure all of this out, I think the big question is, how much influence should private companies have over our schools? And is that worth risking our commitment to fairness and opportunity for all kids? What does it really mean to give parents control? And how do we make sure that every student, no matter where they come from, gets a good education that helps them succeed in life?
Those are the right questions to ask, and they're not easy questions, but they're the ones we need to be asking. Because our democracy depends on it, our economy depends on it, and our future as a society depends on it.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
It was great being here.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us. We hope you'll keep learning about this issue and think about what it means for your community. Stay informed, stay involved, and let's make sure education stays a powerful force for good in our world.